Chapter 1 Part 1. You are listening at FameTV.com. Kill the Lights by Jangryang proofreader/editor. Kaima, worrying Vic's face when he met him after 2 weeks was half the size. Honestly, even before now, when Mason had seen his chubby stomach, he thought it would be better for him to lose some weight. But still, he didn't want him to be so thin. The filming is. Vic mumbled like he was going to cry soon. Mason said, and made a sorry face. Because he thought if he say sorry, Vic would start crying for real. But even for a sorrowful expression, Vic's eyes gathered some tears. The season was, it was all green, but a lot of them fell. Yeah, probably. Actually, outside the window, the trees were still green, but Mason nodded his head and agreed with him. Yesterday night I had a dream. The snow was falling from the sky. The snow piled up, and the tree leaves have all fallen. Like that, the shoot gets postponed to next year. I was so scared that I woke up and cried. I see. It's definitely scary. Mason made a face like he agreed strongly. Director Chase, who came to visit with Vic, said, "You said you were not gonna be like this," and scolded him. What if Haley feels pressured and it slows down his recovery? Vic said, "What did I do?" with a depressed face. I didn't say it to slow down your recovery. Mason shrugged his shoulders at Vic's apology and smiled. But will you be able to get discharged by next week? How about we shoot a scene that doesn't require a lot of walking? Vic knew it was too much, but still asked in a hopeful tone, and Chase strongly grabbed his shoulders. Director, seriously. Running around with a gunshot wound can only happen in a movie. What do you mean next week? What if he gets a sequela asterisk, a condition that is the consequence of a previous disease or injury? Actors are not expendable. What do you mean expendable? I didn't mean like that, this is not something that can be done without 1 or 2 months of hospitalization. But it'll snow for real after 2 months. That's not true. LA is not like that, Vic. How can it snow in a warm city where 4 seasons are warm? Chase scolded him like treating a child, and Vic said, "But I want to film. I want to film Haley," in a childishly adamant tone. The other guys have started to eye him. But I found him first though. Vic grabbed his hair in frustration, afraid that someone would snatch away Haley. However, if Haley is doing well, the movie will do better too, but still, I have to film the movie whether it'll be good or not. Think about it, if it snows, everything will, there's no way it'll snow, but even if it snows, we can shoot when he gets better. I know, but what? Chase said seriously and excitedly at Vic, who did not listen at all, and Mason, who thought about it for a moment, continued, "But do you think a scene that doesn't require any running will be possible from tomorrow?" Pardon. Vic and Chase turned around to Mason, and Mason was finally able to say what he'd wanted to say ever since they stepped into the hospital room. "I'm getting discharged today. It would have been better if you guys contacted me first before getting here." Tony, who just walked in after filing for a discharge, looked at the 3 people with a puzzled expression, and Mason awkwardly smiled at Vic and Chase, who were looking stunned. Actually, 2 weeks of rest for just a gunshot wound meant he had been lazing around enough. When he was a mercenary, if he had a lot of time, he would rest for maybe 10 days, but if he didn't have any time, it was common for him to get some stitches and get stationed for the next mission right away. Of course, this body was weak and its recovery was unbelievably slow, but Mason couldn't stay in the hospital because he was itching to get out. Since he hurt his leg, he couldn't exercise, and he was sick of only reading books. His bones were aching, and he felt like he was going to get sick if he stayed any longer lying down on the bed. He even felt depressed. He finally convinced Tony, who was concerned that it was too soon to get discharged, to take him back to his house. Since no one probably believed that a Haley, who got a gunshot wound, would be discharged from the hospital in 2 weeks, it was really empty in front of the hospital and as well as his house. Thinking about how the paparazzi had caused a commotion earlier by breaking into the hospital room, this was a good thing. It was definitely a good idea to get discharged now. Mason looked at the bright side and sweetly said, "Goodbye," to Tony, who drove him up to the front of his door, and got off. He refused Tony, who offered his help to get him inside the house, and walked inside the front gate on his crutches, and noticed his messy garden. Right, Noah turned my garden into this." Mason remembered the incident, which he had completely forgotten. His garden looked like a city, a month after a war. It was like a place where new life forms were growing after the traces of humanity was erased. Plants were growing haphazardly all over. In other words, it was too hideous to be called a garden. That broken tree and dug up grass. I have to do something about those shattered rocks. Mason thought depressingly and got rid of the microdot cameras and bugs in front of his door. Why are there so many? Mason, who came in after removing 8 of them from outside his front gate, got annoyed while getting rid of cameras attached noticeably to his front door and windows. After having saved Noah, Haley's reputation has probably changed, and strangely, the quality of the cameras has gotten nicer too. What are they doing to a person who led a routine life? He woke up early every morning, took a walk, drank a cup of coffee, ate, and then took lessons in coffee making and acting, and at the end of the day exercised, showered, and finally went to sleep. Mason struggled to enter the access codes with his 2 hands full of cameras and entered his house. Looking at his messy home, Mason thought, should I call a cleaning company? But probably I have to get rid of those bugs and cameras again, and felt depressed again. Since he was lying on the hospital bed without moving, his stamina, which had been improving, went down a lot, like air escaping from a balloon. Again, just coming back home made his body feel heavy, like soaked cotton. How can my strength run out so fast like this? Maybe my body became worse than before. Mason thought logically and bitterly climbed onto his bed. I have to wash up and then go to sleep. It's annoying to wrap up the bandaged leg with the plastic wrap, but first, I'll just take a short nap. It was very easy to fall asleep. Ha! Mason breathed heavily and closed his eyes. Noah was deeply sucking on his lower body. He didn't know how many dreams he have had like this. When he first had the dream, he couldn't hide the depression and the feeling of guilt, but now that he dreamed so many times, it was easy to be like, just do whatever. At least it is only within a dream. Of course, he still nursed a tiny amount of discomfort, but how to put it, since it was not by his will, he could let himself go. But still, it's a little. Mason mumbled an excuse and stroked Noah's cheek as he looked up at him. Noah rubbed his lips on Mason's inner thigh and nibbled. When Mason's waist flinched, Noah smiled slightly and said, "You've a really vulgar body," as if insulting him. "Do you know how many times you came just from sucking you a little? How does this dick even work?" Noah stroked Mason's penis and lightly grabbed and pressed on the testicle with one hand. Due to dripping pre-cum and cum, it was slippery and stimulated the erogenous zone. Ugh. STO. Noah. Ah. Okay. You are saying that I should put it in fast. He whispered like Mason is uncontrollable. So lewd, seriously. Noah took a deep breath, swirled his finger once in the anus that was already loose and approached with his forbiddingly erect penis while stroking it. Mason shivered at the sensation of a bite on his shoulder, and as a hard object opened his hole, he screamed, "Hi it." Soon his body opened up, and a heavy thing pushed its way inside. Ha! Ah. Ugh. Ah. Mason hugged his shoulders when a spark ignited in his head and felt like it was going to explode. Mason's hands that held Noah's sweaty back kept slipping, and so he held on to anything that he could. When he panted, grabbing onto the wet bedsheet, splat, Noah slightly withdrew his penis that tightly filled the inside and thrust it back in. Fuck, what am I gonna do if you keep asking for it even though I put it in already? Noah grabbed both of Mason's nipples and thrust with all his might. Splat, splat. The slow and deep sensation was not satisfactory, so Mason moaned and raised his back, and Noah held his waist and strongly hit on the inside. Hit, ah. Because of the sensation that made his eyes blur, Mason tried to shake his waist, but before he could, Noah grabbed his waist, opened Mason's thighs wider and strongly thrust inside. All the hair on his body stood up, and he started to shiver.
Ha! Ha!
Noah's harsh breath touched Mason's neck, and Mason strongly shook his head and cried. No. More. He knew this was a dream, but he thought his head was going to burst. Not only did his whole body feel electrified, it also started to hurt. Mason, Mason. Noah bit his neck and whispered. Mason felt his sight turning black. Noah deeply pushed his penis, like he was piercing through the inside. Mason thought his stomach was going to rip and stopped breathing. And Noah's thing that thrust deep inside him got bigger and soon poured out a warm fluid. At the unfamiliar feeling of his insides getting wet, Mason shivered and also came, and Mason realized he was actually ejaculating and opened his eyes. Mason opened his eyes and moved his lips at the air, which unlike his dream was cold.
Ah.
Seriously, Mason frowned and touched his wet thighs with his hand. His underwear and even his pants were wet. Please, it can't be just a normal wet dream. He didn't wish for something big. Mason sighed and stood up to the side where it wasn't wet. Scary. Really. When he awkwardly sat on the bed and opened his pants, his underwear was a mess even though he probably never touched it and was only dreaming. He pulled out some tissue and opened his brief with an anxious heart. He saw the sticky cum that messed up his underwear. It was understandable that Noah had insulted him in his dream, saying, "How does this stick work?" Mason opened his brief with some tissue to wipe the insides and took a moment to reflect, as he scratched his cheek. Now that he thought about it, he stayed in the hospital for the past 2 weeks and didn't properly relieve himself. Of course, he thought, but still, this is too much. Mason lightly clicked his tongue and grabbed his penis. The wet dream was so amazing that his body had literally shivered, and so, he felt that the reality was more lacking and unsatisfactory. His hand was wet and felt a little unpleasant, and Mason spread his legs and sat down and moved his hand up and down. Even though he had poured out this much, he got hard right away, and his face started to blush a little.
Ah.
Of course, I feel something lacking a little. Mason tasted something bad in his mouth and sighed. Now he couldn't be satisfied anymore with a pinup star like Julia's AV. That doesn't mean that he could think of Noah to masturbate. Mason felt his hand tingle slightly from remembering Noah's erotic face and frowned. But, it's not so wrong. Mason thought, and right at the moment when he started to move his hand a bit faster, drrrr, Mason startled at the sudden noise and raised his head. Near the bed, the phone that he took out before sleeping was vibrating. Shit, who could it be? Mason looked at the screen, full of annoyance. Noah Ray Carlton. Mason was shocked and swallowed the spit collected in his mouth. Just now he had moved his hands while thinking about Noah unconsciously. He swallowed the saliva and halted. He stared blankly at the ringing phone for a while, and soon the vibration stopped. The notification of a missed call popped up. Hi guys. Finally the sidetrack. I hope you guys enjoy it. I got a new job, so I'm still getting used to the new schedule. By the way, thank you so much of helping and supporting me. It helped me a lot. Without you guys, I wouldn't know what to do. I'm
So
happy that I have readers like you guys. You guys are freaking awesome. Now that our blog is copy-proof, it'll be a little harder for them to just copy and paste. Again, thank you so much. Love you guys. 3 PS. I think Vic's name spelling was big. If you see the picture, it says big.
What?
Continue to part 2. Listen to the full novel at FameTV.com, direct link in the description.